deal with a disciplinary issue? Well, unfortunately, it does involve a certain amount of red tape, but I see my role as making your life easier by making sure you don't get tangled up in it. The ACAS Code of Practice on Disciplinary and Grievance Procedures underpins this whole area, and I would strongly recommend that you go and find yourself a copy of it before you start. If you end up dismissing someone, you need to be able to show that you followed a fair procedure. If you lose a claim for unfair dismissal, and the tribunal finds that your failure to follow a fair procedure is unreasonable, your employee could benefit from an uplift to their compensation that makes your failure all the more costly for your business. There are certain practicalities to bear in mind throughout this process. First of all, keep written records or notes of all steps taken. But remember, it's very likely that you'll need to give these notes to your employee at some point, so be careful what you write in them. You and anybody else involved in the process, including the employee, needs to maintain confidentiality. You need to act promptly. If there's an issue, don't wait 2 or 3 months to deal with it. It will only make it more difficult. And you need to communicate your decisions effectively with reasons for any decisions taken. So asked in the first instance, can you deal with it informally? Sometimes a quiet word with an employee can nip something in the bud before it escalates into something much worse. It's likely that you can only use this for minor issues, and if you do, make sure your meeting is still confidential and private. Your employee needs to know what the problem is, how it's arisen, and what action is needed in future. Keep a note of what's said and send it to your employee, making sure they know a formal process might be followed if the issue isn't resolved. If you don't think informal action is appropriate, or if that doesn't work, you need to investigate the allegations thoroughly. That's the case even if it's a very clear-cut decision and you think there's no doubt of guilt. You need to establish what the facts are. Something might come to light during the investigation which is an entirely reasonable explanation. The amount of investigation you need to do will vary depending on the situation, but it must be reasonable in all the circumstances. Mostly, the more serious the conduct, the more serious the consequences, the more investigation you're going to have to do. So far as who should conduct it goes, you already need to be thinking at this stage about separate personnel for each stage. Ideally, you'd have 3 different people, one for the investigation, one for the disciplinary hearing, and one for the appeal. So think about who can do each stage right from the outset. You might also want to think about suspending your employee. It's not a disciplinary sanction in itself, but it can sometimes be helpful if you think your investigation might be hampered by having them in the business, or if they might otherwise be damaging to what's going on. So let's say your investigation decides disciplinary action is warranted. What does a disciplinary hearing look like? You need to invite your employee in writing, giving them as much information as they need to be able to respond to the allegations against them. They also need to understand what the consequences could be. So if that's a written warning, a dismissal, set that out in the invitation letter as a possibility at this stage. The hearing itself should not be treated as something quasi-judicial. It's between you and your employee. You need to set out the case against them and give them a full opportunity to respond. They're entitled to be accompanied at the meeting, either by a work colleague or a trade union representative, but not by a legal representative. Further investigation might be needed depending on what comes out of the hearing, and if that's the case, you'll need to adjourn and reconvene at a later date. The decision itself should be confirmed in writing, giving clear information on whether it's a warning, a dismissal, or, if the employee's contract permits it, some other sanction, like demotion or a pay cut. Whatever your decision, it must be fair and reasonable, and must be based on a genuine belief of guilt on reasonable grounds. The last stage will always be the appeal stage, in case the employee is dissatisfied with the outcome. The right to appeal should be communicated in the decision letter with a time frame for lodging their appeal. It should be conducted by someone who hasn't been previously involved and can either be done as a review of the decision or a rehearing of all the evidence. If you are seen to be dealing with issues promptly and transparently, your employees are more likely to continue to work well together with you and the business.